A few months ago, a quote from an NHL.com article that got massive news coverage really caught my eye. Sheldon Keefe stated to the media that Mitch Marner could be used as a defenseman after he was paired up with Morgan Rielly during practice. The idea of this to many seemed absolutely absurd. However, if Mitch ever dresses as a defenseman this season, he wouldn't be the first to do so. More players have managed to impressively swap positions in the NHL than many fans think, and perhaps the most notorious example of a successful position swap comes from Brent Burns. Burns was drafted by the Wild in 2003 as a right winger out of the OHL, but once entering the NHL, Burns would get converted from a forward to a defenseman thanks to defensive-minded coach Jacques Lemaire. It took him a few years to adjust to the new position, but come 2007, Burns emerged as one of the Wild's top defensemen, posting career highs in both goals and points. Minnesota would occasionally slot Burns into the wing when needed, making him an extremely versatile asset, one that they would eventually trade away at the 2011 draft. The Sharks would give up a lot to acquire Burns, and would quickly revert him back to a forward after acquiring defenseman Matt Irwin. In August of 2014, however, the Sharks announced that Burns would move back on defense, which actually received a ton of backlash online, but the permanent switch paid off as Burns flourished soon after, totaling 75 points in the 15-16 season and winning the Norris Trophy in 2017. As of today, Burns has began to slow it down, but the move to defense proved to be anything but questionable as time's gone on. Another sorta recent player to flip-flop positions was Dustin Byfuglien. Although now retired, Byfuglien was originally a defenseman until the Blackhawks decided to swap him to the wing. The idea was to have a large presence near the net, and Byfuglien's big frame was perfect for that role, as he helped play a major role in the Blackhawks Stanley Cup run in 2010, scoring 11 goals, 3 of which occurred during the finals. After winning it all and playing top 6 minutes, Byfuglien would get shipped off to Atlanta, where they decided to revert him back to his original position. And with Dustin back on the blue line, he continued to excel, getting named to the All-Star game in his first year, while also being named the alternate captain a few months into his tenure. Adjusting to any position takes a lot of work, and Byfuglien admitted that prior to the 13-14 season, he changed his entire fitness regime, focusing on stick handling and puck movement, and that change helped him massively, as during his time with the Atlanta Winnipeg franchise, he would produce 5 50-plus point seasons, all while continuing to be a physical presence. NHL stars switching positions is actually a lot more common than you would think, as some of the NHL's most legendary players of the past also adjusted to playing a new role. But perhaps no one did it better than Red Wings' Red Kelly. Kelly is the most notorious name besides Burns to appear when researching this topic, and he might just be the most successful to ever do it. Kelly was a dominant defenseman during his time in Detroit. How dominant, you ask? Well, a crazy statistic I found shows that from 1950 to 1957, through 7 seasons, Kelly was named to the All-Star game 6 times. His role on the blue line was a massive one, and with him on the team, the Wings managed to win 8 regular season championships and 4 Stanley Cups. After his 12 years in Detroit, Kelly's story gets fascinating. Originally, when he was drafted in 1947, the Toronto Maple Leafs passed up on him after a scout predicted that he wouldn't last more than 20 games in the NHL. And almost 2 decades later, after Kelly had a falling out with management, the Leafs were the team that convinced him to continue playing, making a trade to acquire him. Leafs general manager Punch Imlach then asked him to switch positions and become a full-time center, to which he agreed, and the switch paid off. Kelly was already a great playmaker, so he made the swap to the center position look easy. He helped teammate Frank Mahovlich become an NHL star while taking home 4 Lady Bings in 8 seasons and winning 2 more Stanley Cups in the process. The only player who even comes close to the success level of Kelly is ironically another Red Wings legend, Sergei Fedorov. Fedorov has been described as, quote, 3 great players in one, and his teammate Steve Yzerman once stated, "I've only seen 2 other other players that can dominate a game like Sergey can, and that's Wayne and Mario. Fedorov's praise was completely deserved, as his elite vision and playmaking abilities combined with his speed made him an insane threat in the offensive zone. But Sergey's defensive game was also dominant, as he was able to take home 2 Selke trophies, making him a lethal dual threat. Legendary Red Wings coach Scotty Bowman knew just how smart of a player Fedorov was, and at numerous times throughout his career, Fedorov would get to experience playing the role of a defenseman. At times, Detroit's defense was an obvious weak spot, so Bowman would slot Fedorov in, and he would play out of this world. During the 1997 playoffs, Fedorov would score 8 goals and 12 points, while on the blue line, describing his play as, quote, "the best hockey I have ever played," and Red Wings senior vice president Jim Devellano stated, quote, "I'm convinced if we left him there, he would have won a Norris Trophy." Although Fedorov preferred playing forward, that didn't stop coaches from slotting him on the blue line when needed, as even during his time in both Columbus and Washington, he would still see himself on defense whenever the team needed him there. Already, we've talked about players switching from one position to another, and even some players alternating through multiple different positions. But has there ever been someone who at one point played every single position? Well, the answer is yes, as there were 3 NHL players I found who at one point in their careers played every position at least once. The first I was able to find thanks to an old hockey card from the 1980s. The name Star isn't normally associated with a player Bob Brooks' caliber, but while looking through old hockey cards, I was able to find an extremely interesting fact on Brooks' card. Underneath his career statistics, it states that he, quote, "has played at all 5 positions." Now, I wish I could go more in depth on Brook, but while researching his stats, mainly his goalie statistics, I was unsuccessful. If anyone knows where I could find them, leave a comment down below. But the 2 other players to play every position both played the game during the 20s and 30s. Every year, the NHL awards the King Clancy Trophy, an award given to the player who, quote, "best exemplifies leadership qualities," and no one did it better than Clancy himself. Tom King was a team player, and played anywhere the coach needed him to be, so it was no shock seeing him in this rare collection of players. However, the way Clancy managed to play every position was extremely unique. During March of 1923, during a game in the Stanley Cup Final, Clancy would become the first player to play every position in one game. In the third period, Clint Benedict, ironically the first goalie to ever don a face mask, took a 2-minute penalty, and back then, goalies had to serve their own penalties. So instead of having the net wide open for the next 2 minutes, Clancy, who normally played defense, decided to put on the pads, playing in net for the entirety of the penalty. King Senators would win the game and eventually the series, taking home the 1923 Stanley Cup. The final player to have played every position was able to do so in perhaps the craziest way possible. Lester Patrick's story is one of my most favorite recent discoveries. Patrick was the player manager of the Cougars and would win the Stanley Cup in 1925, but after the WCHL collapsed, the Cougars became the Red Wings, and Patrick decided to ditch his former franchise to join the New York Rangers. During his playing days, Patrick was a rover, but during a game in 1927, he actually had to serve as a substitute defenseman in a game against the Americans. But that's not what Patrick is most known for. On April 7th, 1928, during Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final, Rangers netminder Lawrence Chabot would suffer an eye injury during the middle of the game. But there was one problem. The Rangers didn't have a backup goaltender. This was actually very common back then, and the opposing team's coach had to be the one to allow the substitute goaltender. Eddie Girard, the Maroons coach, refused to let the Rangers use Sens Alec Connell, who was in the stands, as well as Hugh McCormick, a minor leaguer. So Patrick decided to take one for the team, inserting himself into the game, famously stating, "Boys, don't let an old man down." Odie Cleghorn, the Pirates head coach, would fill in for Lester as he would stop 18 to 19 shots, helping his team win the game and eventually win the Stanley Cup. To this day, at 44 years and 99 days old, Patrick is still the oldest player to have ever played in the Stanley Cup Finals. So, as shown, player switching positions is bizarre, yet completely possible. Who knows when we'll see the next position swap? Samuel Morin tried making a switch, and it failed. So, there is the risk of it not panning out. Regardless, it takes immense skill to pull it off. So, if anyone could do it next, why not Marner?